Hello and welcome back to Cinema 104. This week we are addressing 80s undercurrents. Now, what do I mean by that? So last week we featured a lot of studio films that were made by big studios, big budgets, so on and so forth, stars. Now we're going to look at films that were made a little bit more on the fringe, some very much on the fringe, of emerging auteurs, directors like the ones from the 70s that we studied before, have a very clear vision for what they're doing. So these are films that are on the fringe, films that are commenting a little bit on the Reagan era, being critical of it, particularly the film I didn't feature here behind me, Wall Street. Great 80s film portraying the culture and the greed of the 80s, but in a pretty negative light, whereas before we saw it exalted in the Reagan era, now we're seeing it critiqued. And then we have the three films behind me. David Lynch's Eraserhead, which we're not watching, but I wanted to promote that one. Beetlejuice and Do the Right Thing. Three auteur directors that bring a new vision into the 80s and bring a new aesthetic, particularly Burton and Lynch, bring a new, unique, darker style, which is very surreal at times, very different styles, each one of them, but together they sort of create a look that we're going to see a lot in the 90s. And this late 80s period is really the birth of the 90s and the independent era, which we're going to study next week. So a lot of the directors that began to shine in the 90s have their early beginnings now, particularly David Soderbergh with Sex, Lies, and Videotape. We'll see that next week. So this week we're looking at independent films and smaller films that were sort of a counterpoint to the Reagan era. All right. And no film is more like that than Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. So that we're also seeing the emergence of African-American directors. And he's probably the most important such person to filmmaking at this time and maybe in the 20th century. So great film, really shows what's going on, not in the rich suburbs that we see a lot in the 80s films like Breakfast Club, but what's going on in an urban environment, in a working class neighborhood. Beetlejuice takes us to the underworld. David Lynch takes us to the dark side of town. So we're exploring the 80s undercurrents. What's going on behind what we normally think of as the 80s, which is bright, flashy, cheerful, muscle-bound men, hot workout videos, all this sort of thing, big budget Hollywood productions. So that's the frame for this week. I hope you enjoy the films. Make sure you watch additionally the videos explaining further. Also, another film I want to mention real quickly is Batman. Of course, you've heard of it. But this Tim Burton goes on to make, as his second big film of the 80s, he makes Batman, which is really the frame. It's the beginning of the franchise model that we see played out today. It starts with Batman, where they have a song, they have merchandise. The film is made to be a hit and made to be a product that's going to be in the audience's life for a number of years. Sound familiar? So we see that with Batman. I wanted to get that in. Enjoy this unit and enjoy the films. All right, reach out with any questions and have a good week.